Yesterday, the province announced something that's aimed at clearing the backlog at the Landlord Tenant Board. It is ridiculous. This backlog started in the pandemic, and it hasn't gotten any better. And they are aiming as well to make some changes to the Residential Tenancy Act that could protect tenants more than they already are. Municipal Affairs Minister Steve Clark got together yesterday to make the announcement with some other bigwigs in the province. And here's what he had to say. It was a warning to bad landlords.
Our plan proposes to double the maximum fines for offenses under the Residential Tenancies Act to $100,000 for individuals and $500,000 for corporations. These maximum fines are the highest in Canada for residential tenancy offenses and send a clear message that the rules must be followed. This is just the latest in a series of steps our government is taking to help renters and increase housing supply, so more Ontarians find a home that they can afford.
They say they will spend $6.5 million to appoint an additional 40 adjudicators at the Landlord Tenant Board. There are currently 39 full-time adjudicators. I don't know if these people are going to stay full-time. They also are going to hire 5 staff to improve service, and they want to discourage renovictions. Have a listen.
When a tenant is required to vacate a unit to allow for renovations, landlords would be required to provide a report from a qualified person stating that the unit must be vacant to allow renovations to take place. Where a tenant has said they wish to move back in once renovations are complete, landlords would have to give the tenant written updates on the status of the renovation and when the unit is ready for occupancy. Tenants would also have a 60-day grace period to move back in after the renovations are complete.
And finally, when the work's completed, there are a lot of people that say, well, I didn't even know the work was completed. I didn't know I could move in. So they've got a fix for that as well.
Landlords must, of course, give these tenants the opportunity to move back in at the same rent they were paying before the renovation. And because renovations take time, we're proposing that tenants would have 2 years or 6 months after the renovations is complete, whichever is longer, to apply to the Landlord and Tenant Board for a remedy should any disputes arise. We're also proposing to set a deadline for landlords to move into a unit when they evict a tenant to use the unit themselves or for their family.
All right, let's talk about this with an expert in housing policy. His name is Varun Sriskanda. You've heard him on the show before. Varun, thanks for being back.
Pleasure to be back, Kelly. Thank you for having me.
So this sounds really great if you're a renter, but if you're a landlord, it sounds like it could get really expensive with very little return on your investment. What do you think of the changes here?
These changes are going to result in a reduction in rental housing stock. I already dealing with thousands of members at Solo who do not want to be landlords in Ontario because of all the red tape, the legislation, the fines, and the cards just being stacked against landlords, including the adjudicators at the board who work against us. This isn't going to help anything at all. To hear the housing minister say that a $100,000 fine on a landlord will increase rental housing stock, that's absurd. It is his government that failed to adequately invest in social housing, supportive housing, and transitional housing units. They did not invest in purpose-built rentals the way they should have. They created this backlog, and now they seem to think by throwing fines around that they're going to increase the supply. Mm-hmm. All they're doing is appeasing tenant union groups, tenant rights groups, housing advocates. They aren't really fixing the system. They aren't making any significant change.
As someone who lived and rented in Toronto when there was very little vacancy, I think it was 1% when I was renting in the city, you took what you could get and you paid what the market, basically said was market rate at the time. So what the market demanded. And so, I quite frankly lived in a lot of dives in my life that I, spent my younger years sharing apartments with other people in various areas of the city. My concern is a landlord that wants to be a good landlord, wants to renovate for the tenant, invests all this money. We all know that renovations cost more since the pandemic. How can you possibly renovate and keep an apartment ship shape and charge the same rent? It's a losing proposition.
Absolutely. You can't do that. Look at the cost of the interest rates itself right now. Landlords are having a lot of difficulty holding on to the properties they already have. You cannot expect someone to fork out tens of thousands of dollars on renovations and then say you can't recoup any of this money. Mm-hmm. Nobody is going to do that. That's poor business practice. It wouldn't work in any other business, and no government would do it. So why expect small landlords to do it?
But arguably, there are some bad landlords out there. We know they exist, right?
Yes.
And so that's why they're upping the fines here. But I think that's going to actually incentivize poor landlords, the upkeep on their properties. And unfortunately, then the poor tenants have to live in horrible conditions.
Yeah, I think this is going to incentivize the corporate landlords, the big ones who have all the skyscrapers and all the towers. They are the ones who are engaging in the renovation. The small landlords, the guys who have one or two rental properties, we're taking the blame for this because the guys who own the skyscrapers want to kick tenants out so they can re-rent those units for more money. We have one unit. If I kick a tenant out for one of my units, it doesn't make a big difference. But if you have a skyscraper with 100 units and all of them are below market rent, you do the math. It is very profitable. So I totally understand why Minister Clark wants to penalize these corporate landlords up to $500,000. Mm-hmm. And I think that's great. Where are the penalties to tenants who don't pay rent? Most tenants who don't pay rent and default have no impact on the Equifax TransUnion credit scores.
Really?
Yeah, and unless the landlord takes the steps to register for the program, and we at Solo encourage our landlords to report timely rent payments to Equifax so we can actually help our renters increase their credit score every month. All of my renters get reported to Equifax for timely rent payments. Mm-hmm. But there is, and if you default on rent, you can see your credit score go down as well. But that's not something landlords are doing. And that's not something the province should implement and make mandatory, to create a system that encourages tenants to make payments on time, which would decrease the backlog at the board. And we look at the adjudicators that they hired at the Landlord and Tenant Board. Is it going to make a difference? I have clients who are waiting 60 days just for a written decision to be made. What's the point of hiring more adjudicators if the current ones aren't spitting out these decisions quick enough? They hired 5 new back office staff for the entire province.
Yeah, I was wondering about that. What are they going to do?
I laughed at that, and I think all my fellow Solo members, we laughed at that. 5 staff for the entire province. We have more members working for us at Solo to keep us going. There is no way 5 for the entire province at the Landlord and Tenant Board is going to make an impact.
I want to ask one more thing, Varun, because this was about the Ontario Human Rights Commission calling on the province to make air conditioning a vital service. What is that going to do to, say I have a current rental contract with someone. Can I renegotiate that rental contract if they're not paying for hydro and they want to put in a, air conditioning unit in their apartment?
Yeah, that's going to create a lot of complications. But if you're going to be now requiring a tenant to pay for hydro, your rent's coming down, right? Because now they're going to be spending more money on hydro or on AC. And if a rent is coming down for a landlord who is already struggling to make the mortgage payments that are sky high, it isn't going to work out well for anyone. That is going to create more red tape and more. And discourage people from wanting to be landlords. Because the goal is to encourage people to come back to Ontario and buy rental properties. All my friends who went to Calgary and bought rental properties, I want them to come back to Ontario. But they won't until the LTD is fixed.
Okay, well, listen, I want to thank you for giving us your expertise and insight on this, because I think a lot of people are celebrating it as a big win for renters. And we like everything to be fair. It's a relationship you're starting when you're a landlord and tenant. You want it to be a positive relationship on both sides, but it has to be fair and even. And this surprises me that the Ford government put out these policies. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Kelly. Thanks for having me on.
Have a great day. Varun Sriskanda is a housing policy expert.